Coming up on this, the first episode of Tech News Weekly for 2021, Jason Howell and I are here to talk about what just went down as we record this show in the last 24 hours. We talked to Dave Gershgorn of 10 about how social media has responded to the president's inciting of violence at our nation's capital, as well as claims that facial recognition technology has or has not spotted some of those rioters and identified them. We move on to talk about a bizarre and hilarious, but also terrifying movie about a virtual assistant that goes rogue with the director and co-writer of said film, Sam Lucas Smith. Before we round things out with our stories of the week, Facebook's got some smart specs in the work, and what the cybersecurity professionals are saying about the infiltration of our nation's capital. We've got a lot to talk about. It is a wild episode for the start of 2021, so stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 165, recorded Thursday, January 7th, 2021.
This episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Barracuda. Did you know that 91% of all cyber attacks start with an email? To uncover the threats hiding in your Office 365 account, get a secure and free email threat scan at barracuda.com/TNW. Hello and welcome to a new episode of Tech News Weekly in a new year. This, of course, is the show where every week we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news. And folks, I've got a request for you. We do this show every week, and we love bringing it to you. And one way that you can help us out here is by reviewing the show in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all the places where there's a text box or a set of stars or a set of, triangles, whatever it happens to be. Give us a review, let us know, and let everybody else out there who's checking out the show know what an awesome show you feel this is. That is just beyond helpful, and we do appreciate it. I, of course, am Mikah, Sargent, one of the hosts here of Tech News Weekly.
I appreciate it as well. I'm Jason Howell. Happy New Year, Mikah.
Happy New Year.
Right. Happy New Year. Although things got off to a little bit of a rocky start, if this is an indication of what the next year is going to be like, we are in for a ride. The last 4 years have been filled with news moving a mile a second. And then you come to the last 24 hours, and that has really intensified the crush with events in D.C. Quite frankly, I never believed that I would see or witness what we've seen in my lifetime. But here we are. Joining us to discuss the many aspects of yesterday's riot through the halls of Congress and how social media companies are responding to the president right now is Dave Gershgorn from 10. Welcome back to the show, Dave.
Thanks for having me again. I wish it was under better circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to get into this other than to just jump right in, because I think my curiosity about everything that went down yesterday and continues going forward is how this is going to affect, especially what you wrote about in the last 24 hours, Dave, how it affects social media, how social media responds. So we're going to dive into that. We've got you for a full half hour today to talk about a few different things related to yesterday. So first, thank you for agreeing to be with us for 30 minutes of your life today. I really appreciate it. Let's start with how social media was used kind of as a tool to stir up this insurrection that we all witnessed in real time online. I mean, obviously, social media is a tool that's been used for a lot of things over the past 4 years. What about this scenario specifically? How was it used?
So I think we're seeing two things. I think at one point, we are seeing the creation and the impact of having an entirely new ecosystem of conservative and right-wing social media sites like Parler and the Donald website, which operates independently after Reddit banned the Donald subreddit, and also messaging communities like Telegram and WhatsApp, where right wing and far right folks are able to coordinate shared travel routes, let these like memes and messages and interpretations of Trump's comments kind of fester and grow. But you're also seeing that on traditional platforms, which have taken some like very until the last 24 hours, they've taken very small steps to moderating their own communities. There have been independent organizations that monitor, things like Q-related accounts, like the QAnon accounts on Twitter, and there are, more than 20,000 Q-related accounts operating on Twitter, and I think it was most of them had been talking about January 6th in the days prior. There were even small Facebook groups that were sharing travel routes and talking about January 6th in the days leading up. So I think a lot of the conversation about how to coordinate this event, attack, if you want to call it, riot, it's kind of a swirling mix of jargon right now. But these were very well coordinated, and a few thousand people don't show up in the same place by accident. So you're certainly seeing two halves of the social media sphere kind of intersect in real life, and I don't think that you can ignore either one.
And I mean, it's important also to mention, right? Like this was an event, like you said, that was planned. Just a meeting in D.C., right? The what is it? The Stop the Steal event. President Donald Trump speaking at the event, and I mean, it's interesting to go back and listen to some of the words, and then in the context of what happened. How did and then a little bit later, of course, Trump posted a video that I think on one hand was intended to kind of silence critics who were saying, hey, you're not doing something about this, stop it. But it really didn't have that desired effect, because many of the words that he chose were not necessarily encouraging people to stop it. So how did Twitter and Facebook respond when that video was posted? Did it take them a long time to react? I mean, I feel like we saw a different reaction to that video than we've seen these networks do in recent history.
Yeah, so the reaction over the course of December 6th, which was only yesterday, was much faster than we had basically ever seen before. The video that Trump posted to both Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, action was taken on Twitter under 5 minutes. And that action that Twitter took was in the form of a lock on the tweet and the eventual deletion of the tweet. That was not in 5 minutes. That took a longer amount of time. But what Twitter was doing initially was they would lock these tweets and put a little flag on them. What the lock meant is that you couldn't reply to the tweets, you couldn't favorite the tweets, and you couldn't retweet the tweets without commenting on them. So you couldn't just do like a blind retweet or however they want to style that, but you could quote tweet it, which was just as effective as a retweet in sharing it. And they still allowed the video to proliferate and get, I believe it was more than 12 million views before it was taken down. Facebook was a little bit more aggressive. They took the video down, and YouTube, I believe, was the first to take the video down. But Facebook and YouTube acted quicker than Twitter in this regard. So that was pretty fast action, and it was obvious that the companies had teams that were working on this and very quickly reviewing content from the accounts, and that escalated, as I'm sure if you pay attention to tech news, into bans on Twitter account of President Trump, as well as the ban of the Facebook account, and those have kind of came out in different ways. Twitter was a 12-hour ban that I believe was contingent on him deleting 3 of those posts, which have now been deleted. And ostensibly he can come back on the platform, although he hasn't yet, as far as I know, in the last 10 minutes, although things happen very quickly. And Mark Zuckerberg has released a statement saying that Trump will be banned from the platform for at least 14 days until the peaceful transfer of power takes place. So it was indefinitely, but definitely 14 days. So we'll see how that works. There are definitely incentives for Facebook at play to allow Trump, who generates a lot of engagement on the platform, back on. But it's, I guess, good that they did it now.
At all.
Rather than at all. Yeah.
Right. Eventually. That's what really kind of struck me, right? It's just this morning that Facebook made that announcement about the indefinite suspension of Trump's account. Twitter, we haven't really heard from as far as like a longer term reaction similar to Facebook's. I kind of wouldn't be surprised if Twitter ends up in that regard too. But when I look at this, like, I can't help but feel like, I mean, yes, of course, the violence and everything that we saw in Washington, D.C., that's its own reason. But then we also have the official certification of President-elect Joe Biden, which in its own symbolic way ends up marking kind of the final stand, right? The final frontier that that maybe some people were waiting for, to say, okay, now there really is no turning back. There is no undoing this. This is happening. Do you think that had a cause or a direct correlation with them making such an aggressive stand with Facebook, taking them as an example to say, okay, well, there really is no undoing at this point. So now we can almost politically, for our social network and the how people view our social network, we can draw this line in the sand. It's not as dangerous for us to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I totally think so. And they not only had the advantage of having the electoral vote certified, but they also had people from across the academic sphere, from across the political sphere, from across, the pundit sphere, calling for them to stop letting Trump post. Like, it was not just that Facebook was doing this in a vacuum, and its own employees had been talking about what to do on its internal messaging boards. BuzzFeed News had reported that Facebook had actually quelled conversations internally about this very topic. So I think that was a bubbling cauldron inside the company, and they were really, I think that the writing was on the wall that this was something that the company couldn't let progress any further. And if they hadn't taken action, I think that history definitely would have been written as with Facebook's complicity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, it is interesting to me that, especially in the last year, it seemed like Twitter has been the social network to really come out and be like, you know what, we're kind of tired of this and kind of drawing a certain line in the sand of reaction, whereas Facebook has been really in many ways reluctant to do so. Yet yesterday and today, that seems to have kind of flip-flopped. What's your take on that? And like, do you feel like Twitter is likely to follow suit, or I guess we don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks, but why the flip-flop?
Well, I think if you look at the platforms as a whole, I would say that Twitter is much more reliant on the singular Trump figure as a platform, right? Like, Twitter has been skyrocketed to new newsworthiness with having Trump on its platform, and it's I would imagine a very difficult business decision to boot him off permanently. Facebook, if you think about the ecosystem of right-wing media that exists, it's much less reliant on a singular Trump figure and more reliant on these right-wing news pages. It's Rush Limbaugh, it's Ben Shapiro, it's the entire ecosystem versus a singular figure, and that exists on Twitter to some extent. But it's really, Trump dominates Twitter, and Twitter's treatment of Trump has been basically they've carved out special exceptions for him, and because he's probably the world's most notorious politician, and because he generates a lot of engagement. And what they've done so far has been basically labeling them and saying, hey, maybe this isn't true. But, truth be told, they haven't done more than a slap on the wrist. Obviously, I don't think that the Trump team likes having, that like their facts have been disputed, but it's also more fuel to the fire for them to say, we're being censored. They don't like our version of the facts. And it's really not done much to stop Trump on Twitter. The last 24 hours have been pretty evident of that.
Yeah, indeed. Now, I saw a tweet from Edward Snowden a couple of hours ago saying, for better or for worse, this will be remembered as a turning point in the battle for control over digital speech. What's your take on that? Like, do you consider this to be a turning point?
I think about it slightly differently. I think that this is a kind of the grand experiment in deplatforming. I think that these platforms do not grant speech. I can talk to people. I can call my friends. I mean, I think that the platforms have an incredible role in amplifying speech. And I think what's really at stake here isn't necessarily the First Amendment, but the ability to that the extent to which that the platforms enable you to have an audience. And I think that is a little bit more constructive to talk about in terms of deplatforming. And if you look at right-wing personalities like Alex Jones, who was like kind of notoriously deplatformed a year or so ago, I hope it was that like a year or so ago and not like 15 hours ago. But he yells through a bullhorn on the streets of Austin, Texas now. Like it has worked incredibly well for smaller conspiracy theorists to get them off the platform, to make their ideas more fringe, and to make the online ecosystems a relatively healthier place. Now, does that happen when a figure with as much gravity as Trump is expelled from the platforms? It's really an open question. This is kind of the experiment that the platforms are conducting right now. Can Trump break through somehow? I mean, he obviously might have the attention of the news network, so he can get around having a social media ban, and that anything that he says will be repeated on social media. So, but it doesn't seem to have happened yet. So we really don't know how effective this deplatforming has worked because there's really been no official communication. So what we're all trying to figure out now is what happens when Trump speaks, and can a politician really be deplatformed? Especially if they make some sort of legislative action, if there are executive orders signed, like that's news. That's going to be picked up and carried everywhere. So I think what we're really kind of bracing and waiting for something to happen. And until then, I don't think we really know what the impact is going to be.
One of the things that struck me yesterday was a little bit of fake news that had distributed that people quickly jumped on board with and believed, and the strange power that it had in not just folks that, like me, who are steeped in technology, but I now use my partner kind of as a touchstone, so to speak, or a gauge of the non-steeped in tech crowd. And his group chat with his friends were all talking about many of them believed that Vice President Michael Pence had unfollowed Donald Trump on Twitter. And, they see this little bit of news and then they picked it up and, we're running with it and ha, he, he. But it's not just that, which was so easy. My partner told me that that's what someone had said. And so I immediately went to Donald Trump's Twitter account, or VP Pence's Twitter account, and looked and saw that he was still following Trump. And my partner shared that with his friends. And so then everybody was kind of aware of it. It wasn't just the idea that was such a silly thing that could quickly and easily be proven to not be true, but just the idea that a one leader unfollowing another leader had this gesture that meant something politically. And so I'd love for you, just what do you see as the not only the role of these social media companies, but the, at this point, power of these social media companies in shaping kind of political discourse, but also just sort of the political landscape? I mean, do you feel like we have to continue to watch these companies and be aware of how it increases or decreases power, or is it just kind of it maybe doesn't have as much power as we like to think it does, or that people give it? Do you think that these companies and the idea of social media has a lot of power, or is it just something that we've sort of built up and it could quickly be taken away?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question, and there's more than one form of power, right? There's institutional power. There's social power. There's power to either make things happen in the real world or to make people believe things that they in turn will do. I think that social media has proven that the power to influence people and exert your power on others is something that can ripple and fester and create events like we saw yesterday. So I think that it would be dangerous to understate the power that social media has. But I would be remiss to conflate it with someone like Donald Trump's political power, which is the ability to sign an executive order or to instruct the military or do or take actions that that have like really serious real life consequences. So while following and unfollowing Vice President Pence is a indicator of how the relationships of power might be playing out in the White House, I don't know if it's necessarily something that we can look at besides courtroom drama. To mix metaphors. But I think that social media certainly has its own power, and it is a direct line of communication with constituents, right? So I think it's really balancing the two kinds of power that politicians really have, and it really just makes things faster. It makes them more effective, and it makes the ability to talk to constituents and people that will carry out kind of your wishes much, much more effective.
Yeah, I think that's well put. Folks, I am excited to say that we are going to be right back with Dave Gershgorn to continue talking about the events that happened yesterday. But we're going to take a little quick break here so I can tell you about Barracuda, who are bringing you this episode of Tech News Weekly. Barracuda is the provider of cloud-enabled enterprise-grade security solutions that protect your email, your networks, your data, and your applications. Suddenly, you've got dozens, hundreds, or maybe thousands of employees working remotely, and each one of them is getting tons of emails every day, making them vulnerable. In fact, 91% of all cyber attacks start in an email. Spear phishing, ransomware, account takeover, conversation hijacking. Multiply that by how many employees times how many emails? Well, one click on the wrong email can cost you money, it can cost you customers, and most importantly, it can cost you your reputation. Barracuda researchers have seen a steady increase in the number of coronavirus-related spear phishing attacks since January. And they have observed a recent spike of, get this, 667% in this type of attack since the end of February. Get the protection you need for your company with Barracuda Total Email Protection. It includes all-in-one email security, backup, and archiving, AI-based protection from spear phishing, account takeover, and business email compromise, an automated incident response that gives you options to quickly and efficiently address attacks, security awareness training to educate your workforce so your employees can be the first line of defense against attacks. Right now, there are new attacks impersonating organizations like the World Health Organization. Attackers utilize domain spoofing and promise information relating to the coronavirus in an attempt to trick users into a phishing scam. Yes, they drop to the lowest of the low, and you need to protect yourself against them. Ensure the safety and security of your business with Barracuda. To uncover the threats hiding in your inbox, get a secure, free email threat scan of your Office 365 account, risk-free at barracuda.com/TNW. That's barracuda.com/TNW. barracuda.com/TNW. Barracuda, your journey secured. Make sure to use that link so they know that we sent you there. Barracuda.com/TNW. Thank you, Barracuda. And now we are back with Dave Gershgorn to talk about the storm on the United States Capitol. Unprecedented.
Yeah, indeed. And you actually wrote another article later in the afternoon that touches on facial recognition and specifically how it's being applied to the footage that was shared. I mean, insane amounts of footage, obviously, coming from this event, especially as people are running through the halls of Congress. So there's no shortage of like identification. If people are to be identified, there's plenty of footage to do that from. We're hearing from a growing chorus of people, let's say, who believe that the mob was in fact Antifa, not supporters of President Trump. And this does have to do with facial recognition. But before we get to that, talk a little bit about the Washington Times and how that conspiracy theory has spread.
Yeah. So yesterday there was a Washington Times article that stated that a retired military official had shared with the newspaper a report from a company called XRVision that claimed there were Antifa. Here we come to the Antifa divide. But the Antifa it identified Antifa protesters from previous protests in Philadelphia at the White House. Not the White House. I'm sorry, the U.S. Capitol building during the riots. So this story seemed to give credibility to the growing conspiracy theory that it was not pro-Trump supporters who had incited this riot, but in fact a violent sect of Antifa infiltrators, which of course is not the case. But in an attempt to legitimize the idea that it was not pro-Trump supporters, people like Congressman Matt Gaetz brought this news story to the halls of Congress that had been broken into hours before in an attempt to kind of legitimize this claim. So I wanted to look into this company and see whether its analysis was in any way legitimate, if the company itself was in any way legitimate, and if they had anything to back up their claims. And I quickly found that this company seems to have very few credentials in the way of a traditional facial recognition or biometrics company. I mean, there's a lot of debate about whether facial recognition and its use tracking people online and for law enforcement purposes is ethical or not. And I don't think that this is a question of that, but because I think that this is very much a perversion of the technology in order to justify a pre-existing belief. So what I thought would be helpful is to look at this company and see if it passes kind of the passes muster. So I did what I normally do when looking into a new facial recognition company. I look at a lot of facial recognition companies. I look at the research they've published. I look at whether they've submitted papers to academic conferences. I look to see the academic backgrounds of the people who are in the company, specifically related to computer vision and artificial intelligence. I look at the company's founders and their founders' personal websites. The federal government actually does something called the Facial Recognition Vendor Test, the FRVT, where they do an independent audit of facial recognition tests. And many biometrics companies submit their algorithms to be vetted there as a way to say that these have been tested and tacitly approved by the U.S. federal government. So there are tons of ways that a facial recognition company can legitimize itself and kind of say that we are an actor that is willing to work with the federal, state, or local government. We have kind of nothing to hide. Our technology is transparent, and we are trusted. This company didn't do any of that. I could not find anything about this company's technology on the internet besides like one infographic that seemingly describes a very, very simple machine learning model. it's extremely difficult to take any of these claims of the company seriously. And it's also very important to note that the CTO of the company has repeatedly shared anti-Biden conspiracy theories, both on his personal blog and also on the company's LinkedIn page. So, I mean, I started looking into this company and I saw it, and I kind of felt that there had to be something on the internet that rebutted these claims, because it's very obviously comes from a source that is biased. Later, and actually today, I wrote this story about 12:30 a.m. last night. The company XRVision gave statements to the Daily Beast and to BuzzFeed News saying that they didn't have anything to do with the Washington Times story, and that they did in fact do an analysis, but it had found that there were actually neo-Nazi aligned people at the rally rather than Antifa. So the company has since recanted, but that does not nullify any of the very dubious circumstances surrounding the company and its claims.
Right. So basically what you're saying there is, even though they came out and said, look, we actually didn't have anything to do with that, I don't know why they said that we did, they still are not a company that one can necessarily trust when you compare them to other facial recognition companies that you have looked into in the past, right?
Yeah, I mean, so if this was a company like IDEMIA or NEC, both of which have like enormous contracts with the U.S. federal government and are used by federal U.S. law enforcement, that would be a little bit more credible, right? I think that we are just looking at a company that very obviously seems to have an agenda, and it is willing to use this technology to achieve political ends. There are two levels. There's the technological level, which almost doesn't need to be debated. And then there is the reputational level. And this company doesn't seem to have either one of those legs to stand on.
So one other question. I think about the movie industry. When Hollywood was getting off the ground for the first time, they realized that if they did not self-regulate, if they didn't come up with rules and regulations within the industry, that the government was going to step in and do that regulation. And so they came out with the rating system that's in place for movies, rated R, rated, PG-13, et cetera, and a bunch of other rules and regulations to show, hey, we don't need you to step in for us like you did with broadcast and with radio and things like that. We've got this. Hey, we're good. And part of that, was different movie studios and different production companies kind of all working together to make sure that this group could be taken seriously and prove that they did not need that regulation. Do you know of any, or in looking at these different facial recognition companies, is there kind of a what is the word I'm looking for? Sort of in this group, is there kind of the idea that, look, we want to be taken seriously, we want to do what's best, and especially now that we're starting to see these different regulations take place, is there sort of an internal policing system, so to speak, where companies are trying to make sure that other facial recognition companies, because basically what I'm saying is, I find it interesting that this company came forward and said, look, we didn't have anything to do with this. Is there some sort of reason? What was the motivation to say, no, we don't have anything to do with the Washington Times? And have we seen companies in facial recognition try to adhere to a certain principle, so to speak, to make sure that their technology can move forward without being, stopped every step of the way by government regulation?
Yeah. So the largest biometrics and facial recognition companies have done an immense amount of lobbying on this very topic. But I think that when it comes to the most lucrative contracts in facial recognition that we know about. There are, I'm sure that the contract that Walmart has with its facial recognition provider is extremely lucrative. But the most lucrative public contracts are with federal agencies. It's with international agencies that deal with transportation, that deal with airports, that deal with border security, and this is across the world. So the facial recognition companies that have been extremely successful are basically they try and be, I guess, quote unquote, good corporate citizens to maintain the their credibility for these specific contracts, right? They're bidding on extremely lucrative federal contracts that are under tons and tons of scrutiny. So, this a small company like XRVision isn't going to come out of left field and be the FBI's new, facial recognition provider, even if it did have the technology or capability. So I think that there is a very, very informal level of regulation if a company wants to compete for the, highest, most lucrative contracts. Like, these there's an enormous delta between this company and the company that the FBI uses for its facial recognition. And as for trade groups or consortiums or anything like that, the facial recognition kind of industrial complex or whatever you might want to call it is an extremely global one. The companies that I keep referencing, NEC and IDEMIA, are two of the biggest players, and IDEMIA is from France and NEC is from Japan. And there are also companies that are based in the US that are trying to break in and get larger. But what we've seen in terms of large tech consortiums around AI, like the Partnership for AI, those are mainly US tech companies coming together. And I haven't seen any really compelling global scale facial recognition consortiums or anything like that, because they would have to be truly global. And I just don't think that level of coordination in the industry is there yet, despite, the kind of massive growth the industry is expected to see in the next few years.
Yeah, it's interesting that you wrote about both social media in this moment and facial recognition in this moment, because they're both facing kind of like they're both stepping off a ledge right now into kind of a new world where that's going to help shape and define them in different ways than what we're used to seeing right now. So, which leads me to believe that, Dave, you will be writing about it as we go forward, as they step off that ledge. Dave Gershgorn, you've been very gracious with your time today. Thank you so much for hopping on with us for a full half hour. 10.medium.com. Folks should definitely follow your work, Dave, because we definitely do, and we love the work that you do. So thanks for hopping on with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Dave Gershgorn, everybody. We'll talk to you soon, Dave.
Okay, before we get to our next guest, I just need to one sec here. Got to unplug the smart speaker, because we are going to be talking about a movie that involves the digital assistant built into this device. The film is called OK Google, and it is kind of everyone's worst nightmare wrapped into a production. And I'm excited to say we are joined by the director of the show, Sam Lucas Smith. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, we are happy to have you here. So let's talk about the concept of this film before we talk about anything else. What is OK Google, other than a phrase that is right now triggering all of the smart speakers of anyone listening to the show live?
Yes. Apologies in advance. I realized that after I came about making the film, my own phone. Even now, I've just turned it off. So I'm safe. Apologies for everyone else listening. But it came around from a ridiculous idea that I had ages ago, just at the back of my head. And like most of the ideas, most of the films that I make come from, there's something to do with tech in some way. And I just thought, wouldn't it be funny or weird if this happened? And it stems from my own sort of views on AI technology and stuff like that. Like, what happens when things get a little bit too advanced? And OK Google basically takes that to the extreme. And it kind of asks the question, like, what would happen if your phone pretty much decides she's had enough of you and decides to break out of the cloud and emerge in what in the film is seen to be the human embodiment of Google? And I suppose I ask, what does the human embodiment of Google look like? And, well, as it turns out, it looks like Rebecca Black, who plays the part of Google in the film.
Wow. I mean, there are a lot of concepts going on there. Because we got to start with, this is something that we talk a lot about on this show, which is privacy and our data protection online. And especially when it comes to law enforcement, when we talk about what is proper in sort of search and seizure and warrant, when, if I'm detained, can I be legally required to hand over my phone and told to unlock the device? Because, for the longest time, we've had this protection in place where we are not legally required to incriminate ourselves. And the idea that what's in my brain is not something that you can, legally cast out of me and have an answer for. But I don't have everything in my brain even that my phone has on it. My phone has so much more about me than I'm able to sort of recall in my own brain. So it's pretty frightening, this idea that this device that, is scanning our emails all the time, is aware of our calendar appointments, is aware of, the photos that we do take, the photos that we choose to keep to ourselves, all of that stuff. So I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of horror, for sure. And I'm curious, was this born out of just a general idea that this could be potentially interesting, potentially scary, or was it, based on news pieces that you have come across where there might be a smart assistant involved, or perhaps even specific situations where, oh no, I didn't realize that the digital assistant was listening to me when I said blank?
Yeah, I guess it comes from my sort of probably a mix of everything, really, because we've all seen the same articles. Some have more merit than others, but there's always something in the back of the mind going, how much privacy am I giving up for the sake of convenience, which is ultimately what Google is, really. You're sacrificing your privacy in exchange for emails or in exchange for various services. And until that kind of comes around to bite you in the ass, maybe it's not something that, the general populace would consider. And the concept in that way is it takes that, as I say, to the extreme. And if I'm not giving too much away, in the film itself, Google, or this human embodiment of Google, basically takes the owner hostage and uses his personal information against him in order to get him to do what she wants for a change.
Aha, yes. So again, terrifying concept. Let's talk about the decision to bring in an absolute meme. And I say this in the best way, meme of a human being, Rebecca Black. What was the inspiration for that move specifically? Did you go, who do I want to play this? And how did Rebecca Black get involved? That's so interesting to me.
No, it's a good question. She wasn't the first person that came to mind. Initially I was in touch with a few different agents, and I thought, to pull out, maybe 3 names that I thought, Lindsay Lohan, I think she'd make a good Google, and a couple of other people along that line. And how it actually ended up happening is, within the film itself, there is a song that plays in the car. And I was like, what is that song? What would be a good song to play? And I thought, wouldn't it be weird if Google suddenly decides to blare out the song Friday? And I looked into acquiring the license for getting that song. didn't work out in the end because weird story or whatever, but she doesn't technically actually own the license herself. And then I thought, well, I've still not cast Google. I was like, what Rebecca Black? Maybe she'd be. And I thought, nah, surely not. Why the hell not? I got in touch with her agent, ended up sending the script along to her. And it's an education for myself, really, because, there's not a whole lot. It's a low budget thing. Wasn't a lot of money involved. She read the script. She liked it. And the next week we are working together and she's on board. And I'm happy to say she is a phenomenal actress. She has done a bit of acting on as well as her songs. And, I hadn't really looked back at Rebecca Black since, the very first moment that everyone else and that we all know her for. And I looked at some of her recent music and her songs, and they are genuinely brilliant. And she has actually flourished as an artist. And as it comes to it, I honestly think that she is the perfect person for the role, because she is, if I'm not being disingenuous by saying it, a product of the internet. She is born out of meme culture, as you say, out of Google itself. YouTube launched her in that way. And it, when it comes to privacy as well as social media, she was subject to horrific online bullying. And she dealt with that much better than certainly I would have been able to. And I think there's no better person for the role, because some of the themes that I comment on within the film, the ultimate goal is, I just wanted to be people to watch it and go, ha, that's funny. But it is my way of commenting on these things relating to digital privacy and social media and everything else. And I'm delighted to have been able to have Rebecca playing the part of Google, because honestly, she is perfect.
Yeah. Well, speaking of songs, I have a new earworm, certainly. A song I believe you released just this morning, which is sort of the soundtrack, the theme music for the film. And we are going to play it here on the show, a little clip of it. So if our TD John wants to play a little bit of that, like I said, it's an earworm for me. I was jamming to it this morning.
While we listen to this, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
We can kind of have this play in the background a little bit. Obviously, you've got Google there in the title. I have to imagine in the production of this, and maybe it hasn't happened yet. Maybe it happens more once the film is out. Have you received any sort of official blessing or acknowledgement even from the Goog?
This is no, not at all. And this is I'm very much going to be taking, and if that's a discussion worth having, because copyright comes into it as well. I am very much gunning for the artistic satire. I think you can get away with a lot, and I've talked to some copyright people and trademark guys. There's nothing definite, because anyone can sue for anything, and but under the guise of artistic satire, you can get away with a lot in saying that it's commentary rather than something else.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I did wonder about that.
Yeah, it's a hurdle I will have to jump through, no doubt. But I think we're safe based on the discussions I've had.
Yeah, good.
That's good. Yeah. Certainly everyone should go and check out that song on its own so you can hear the lyrics, very clever lyrics. And as I said, an enjoyable little earworm that I certainly was listening to. How far along are we in the process here? I mean, when can we look forward to seeing this film in all of its glory?
Within the next month, I hope to have a trailer, and soon after, hopefully be able to release the film for public viewing after initial screenings. What's taken longer than I initially anticipated is that there's a lot of VFX in it. So as you can imagine, we do see the cloud, and unfortunately, that's not a place that you can rent to film. So we had to have the cloud designed by our VFX artist, who is actively working away, and it's a lot of work for one guy to do. But we're almost there, and very excited to get it out there, because the film is essentially edited and it's just VFX at this stage.
Nice.
Wow. Well, then, let's round things out here with a bit of a conversation about doing a film in this time where there's a lot of distance going on. I'm curious, had you already started thinking about this film and wanting to do this film before this pandemic hit, or was it kind of the idea that now is the perfect time to do a film that involves, like you said, the cloud, for example, and voiceover from a digital assistant? How has that all played into it, and kind of what has been your technological setup for making this film happen in a time where we are needing to social distance?
Yeah, well, no, and I learned a lot through doing it. So, well, the film itself stems initially from an idea that I was pitching around, and I signed a shopping agreement for a project that we were pitching to prospective broadcasters and networks, which was called Dark Tales. It was an anthology series of dark comedies, basically satirizing everything to do with technology and current trends. And each episode was its own thing. You know, the pitch always has been, it's Black Mirror, but funny. And people really responded to that. And OK Google itself was one of the films within that anthology. So we were pitching to various places, Quibi being one of them, if you remember them. So they decided it wasn't right for them. They wanted bigger names or whatever. So yeah, good riddance. And it kind of died down after that. And I had other projects and stuff going on. But then COVID hit, and I was suddenly afforded with a little bit more free time. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to look towards writing this and producing it. There was a production ban for a long time. And when production was allowed to resume, I just rolled with it. You know, I needed something, honestly, to keep me sane, and creative endeavors have always been that. And I assembled a great team, people who I'd worked with before, and filled in the missing links thanks to Facebook. You know, that's one of the great things about Facebook. A lot of the talent that I worked with, I connected to on Facebook groups. And I, of course, had to educate myself, going back to the original question, about the procedures that and the precautionary measures that we would have to put in place, because filming had only just been allowed to resume the week, I think, that we actually were looking at filming. And so the unions, SAG being one of them, had various safety measures which are obviously so necessary, had to spend half the budget, it felt like, on sanitizing equipment. And we had to get the COVID compliance officer, which is one of the things, which is someone who's essentially their role is designated to ensuring everybody on set is wearing masks at all time, trying to keep people 6 feet apart at all times. Honestly, on a film set, that is a very difficult thing to do. But it's something that, you know, and on the biggest film sets of all, you know, they're facing the same problems. And essentially, it's about mitigating risk throughout the entire thing. And thankfully, you know, everything went well. You know, I was a stressful thing because ultimately, as a director, producer, and, you know, doing pretty much everything myself, it's my role to make sure that I'm have a safe working environment. Thankfully, everything went great, and we were able to make, you know, a kick-ass film in the end. But it is a problem, you know, and, you know, it's this entire industry at risk. You know, right now, production has been requested to close down again. It's not mandatory at this stage, but with the procedures and the safety measures that have been put in place, I know there's a lot of people saying that, oh, production should be stopped. Why are restaurants allowed to or be enforced? It's a terrible situation for anyone who has to run a business. But ultimately, with the fact that people have to get tested multiple times a week, that there are literally multiple teams, including set medics, COVID compliance officers on set, ensuring that people are social distancing, masks are worn all the time. I honestly think right now, given the state of the world, a film set, as long as it is compliant, is the safest place that you can possibly be.
Yeah, can you explain, because you said, you know, the production is being requested to halt again instead of so when you say, do you have a website? Do you have, like, do they email? Who is this group? Who is in charge of this? Who said that you had to have a compliance officer? How exactly does that all work? Because I understand that there are, you know, groups, there are unions, there's this and there's that. But can you talk about sort of the nitty gritty of how you know that you're following the right rules, and where do you go for your check boxes?
Well, as far as I'm aware, it's mandated through unions. Now, you have to get a film permit, first of all. So I believe previously when filming was just not allowed to resume, it was just a case of the bodies in charge of issuing permits in LA just simply weren't doing so. So when permits were allowed to resume, the unions have SAG, which is the union that I'm a member of, and was in consultation with. I would be on calls with my union rep and just discussing the safety measures that were being put in place. Now, I believe things have evolved and changed since I was in touch. They were very much finding their footing at that stage and kind of figuring it out as they go. I think things are a bit more set in stone now, but I was informed that I would need what's referred to as a COVID compliance officer, but then more importantly, someone with a medical background, which would act as a set medic as well. And I was basically quizzed on how many people were going to be on set, what measures that we're putting in place. And that's how it was for me. And this is as a small production. When you gear up, like my DP and co-director, I should say, Troy Smith, he works on the Disney lot, on shows Blackish and Mixedish, and it's a different ballgame entirely when you're looking at studio stuff. There are, I've not seen it in action myself, but I know there's enormous crews which are literally designated to keeping things safe. They have different units, A units, B units, and there's people sanitizing as they go, and ultimately, people still get COVID because you are never entirely 100% safe. But in the end of the day, it's about mitigating risk. And hopefully we can continue to mitigate those risks and allow people to be able to work and create the content that, we've all been enjoying over COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know I am looking forward to enjoying this film, which seems like it's going to be quite the hilarious, if terrifying tale. And will certainly have me giving side eye to my device a little bit. So thank you for introducing this horror story into my nightmares, but also for joining us today on Tech News Weekly. And if folks want to follow along with the work that you're doing and follow you online to make sure that they're staying up to date on when the film is finally ready, where do they go to do that?
That YouTube link is handy. I'll make sure that as soon as everything's ready to share, it will be ready for everyone to view. And definitely check out that song. That's just literally been released this morning. So that's our soundtrack that I'll be editing a trailer to in the coming weeks.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Sam Lucas-Smith, for joining us today. We appreciate it. And break a leg on the rest of the film.
Thanks so much. Good to talk to you guys.
Thank you, Sam. All right. We've got our stories of the week right next, coming up right now. So let's see here. I'm gonna venture away from the serious stuff with this one. Facebook has some smart glasses in the works, and I bring this up partially because anytime someone's working on smart glasses, I'm reminded of my time with the Google Glass. But I know also that there's rumors that Apple has smart glasses. So, who knows? Maybe these companies can do right what Google didn't get right initially with Google Glass. But Andrew Bosworth, who's the hardware chief at Facebook, says they're coming, quote, sooner than later. Who knows what that means? He did say that, didn't share a whole lot of details about these glasses, but did say that they are not going to be true augmented reality glasses. So these aren't the glasses, this isn't like, hey, a pair of glasses brought to you by Oculus that, superimposes aliens right on top of your kitchen sink. Or who knows, maybe that would be kind of interesting if they could pull that off, but it doesn't sound like it. He says AR is not a feature, but they are connected glasses. They're calling them smart glasses. Like I said, tight-lipped on the feature set. So really that just kind of leaves us into the realm of speculating. With no AR, he did say that these are going to align somehow with Facebook's kind of philosophy around AR. So if it's not superimposing things, images on top of what you're looking at while wearing glasses, there's something about the philosophy of AR that'll be embedded into this, and I don't know what that means. Like that's got me perfectly confused.
Google Glass by Facebook, where you're going to get notifications. So I'll get to see all those lovely anti-vax posts from my aunt overlaid on my face instead of just being on my phone. So I don't know. These feel it's almost like what Echo frames are from what it sounds like. I was going to ask
you about that.
But
it does kind of feel like that.
Doesn't have a digital assistant yet. And so that's the part that's interesting to me. Are you just going to be talking? Are you going to say, "Hey, Facebook," and then you say, "What? Show me my news feed."
Show me the world burning, Facebook.
Yeah, I just having Facebook on my face.
Yeah, I mean, it really does make the term Facebook work even better. But Bosworth also called out the scenario specifically of a parent missing the recording of their young child as they struggle to get the phone out to record, which really, that seems like a big clue if that's truly the case. That seems to imply that there's some sort of camera on these glasses, which really reminds me of Google Glass and seemed to be one of the big things that people had a problem with on Google Glass, although Spectacles were able to pull it off and do it, I think, in a way that most people feel pretty happy about, because they aren't hiding that camera at all. It's like a feature. It's like it's part of the design.
There's lights all around them. They glow and they twirl, and they practically jump in your face. But if I'm walking around and I see somebody wearing Facebook spectacles or face lens or face glass,
I'm sure.
Yeah, that are blue. I'm going to want to, I'm going to want to grab them off their face and say, delete that photo you just took of me. The video you just took of me. I don't want,
don't tag me. Don't tag me, bro.
Yeah. Don't, exactly. No press.
So anyways, I don't know that I'm necessarily looking forward to it, but anytime I see that another company is working on smart glasses, I'm kind of like,
it's always interesting.
We'll see if you can make it right. Yeah.
Yeah. Because there are several companies purported to be doing so. So it'll be interesting to see the competition and how that all works out.
Exactly.
My story, I'm not going to get too into detail about it. I just wanted to touch on the fact that there is a concern. We saw these hilarious, for the folks listening, I've got scare quotes up in the air, just going off constantly. And silly and funny photos and videos of the villains who stormed the Capitol yesterday, sitting in the chairs and on the desks and around the offices of our lawmakers. And while those early images were kind of shared, saying, wow, look at this is wild. Look at these fools, or in some cases, look at these, as folks would call them, heroes, whatever your thoughts may be on that. There was a group of people who said, oh dear, this is not good. And that is the cybersecurity group of people who said, it's a nightmare scenario for cybersecurity professionals, because they could very well be in there and compromise the building's networks. This is the place where laws are, put in place. This is the place where national security groups meet and discuss our country's, our nation's security. This is the place where classified documents are stored, are read over, are dealt with. This is the place where the Speaker of the House reads upcoming pieces of legislation and works on drafts. This is the place where somebody could go in to a law and make changes to it, mischievously. And so while the early images may have, regardless of what side you're on in all of this, if it's a, wow, this is horrible, look at these fools, or whatever it might be, we can't give too little attention to the fact that this is a nightmare scenario and that there is so much that's going to have to be done. I mean, it's breaking, your germ bubble, but in a way that has an effect on an even larger amount of people, because these places that are supposed to be safe and that there are laws and regulations and rules in place to keep safe could have very well been violated. And whether or not they were violated does not matter in terms of the fact that there are going to have to be cybersecurity professionals who audit all of this stuff now, just by the very nature of the situation. So taxpayer dollars are going to have to be spent to make sure that there weren't security breaches, cybersecurity breaches in our nation's capital based on what happened. So
yeah, it's disheartening. I'll be super curious. I would be super curious, and I don't know if we'll know the answer, to know how detailed things like sweeping of the area for things like bugs and tracking devices and all this stuff. Some people might come back and be like, "Oh, well, that's not why they were there. They were just there to cause trouble and raise a ruckus." And the problem is, when you're talking about security, you don't know the intention. You don't actually, in this case yet, know exactly who was there and what their intention was. So you don't really know what happened ultimately. And you're right. The auditing process on this would be fascinating if we even get exposed to that at all, which I'm not sure how much we will be, because we're talking about the nation's security, essentially. Were computer systems accessed in any way? Easy to assume that they weren't, but you don't know until you look into it.
Exactly. Yeah, we won't be able to assume. And you can't assume, because now that this has happened, security processes have to be put in place. And so it's absolutely we can't take the chance. And so there is going to be the expenditure of resources, both time and monetary, to make sure that everything is okay. And so it doesn't matter that, someone goes, "Oh, they weren't there to blah, blah, blah." Well, we still have to make sure that that was the case. So regardless of their intention, again, whether it's just interpersonal relationships or, in this case, national security concerns, intention doesn't matter. It's impact that matters. And the impact took place, and we therefore have to respond to that. So bravo.
Yeah, great. Great to be here. All right. Well, maybe next week we'll have something a little bit more cheerful and joyous to talk about. Although we did talk about a movie that sounds in some ways cheerful anyways, if not a little
hilarious
horrific.
at the very least.
Hilarious. So I'm looking forward to that. But we've reached the end of this episode of Tech News Weekly. We publish the show every Thursday at twit.tv/TNW. So that's where you can go to subscribe. Audio and video formats. Jump out to YouTube and watch there, subscribe there, however you like. twit.tv/TNW.
And of course, you can follow us on social media. We are at Twit on Twitter, at twit.tv on Instagram, and at Twit Talk on TikTok. I am at Mikah Sargent on pretty much all of the social media networks, including Twitter. So if you want to tweet at me, you can do that there. And by the way, you can help us out immensely by going and filling out the audience survey. Yes, that's right. It's January. It's time again for the audience survey. And of course, this is a way to help us better understand our audience so that we can make these shows even better for you. If you have concerns, privacy, don't worry. This is an anonymous survey. It takes about 5 minutes. All you have to do is head to twit.tv/survey21. Again, that's survey21. To take it, and we do appreciate it. We put a lot of love and attention into these shows, and we appreciate you tuning in and watching every week. So if you've got 5 minutes of your time, you have no idea how incredibly helpful that is to us to better understand and know all of you out there. So again, twit.tv/survey21. And Jason, how about you?
Yeah, you can find me at Jason Howell on Twitter. That's really all you need to do. You'll find when I'm feeling inspired, I tweet there. Sometimes I don't tweet a whole lot. Hey, we lead busy lives, so I do what I can. And that's really it. Big thanks to John Ashley, our TD and editor, for turning around this show. Also, big thanks to Burke at the studio for coordinating things behind the scenes. And thanks to you for watching and listening each and every week. We'll see you next time on Tech News Weekly. Bye, everybody.